If you go to the Postal Service store, you've got quite a few options for stamps to send a standard letter. But look at this. The book of 20 stamps with otters on them costs $12, but this sheet of 20 stamps with tigers costs $15. What's going on here? Is there a discount for cute animals? It turns out that the tiger stamps, called Save Vanishing Species, are semi-postal stamps. 60 cents per stamp goes to the cost of postage, like with the otter stamps or any normal first-class stamp, but an extra 15 cents per stamp are a donation to charities that help endangered species. So where do these stamps come from, and how many are there? Like Ben Gibbard on a solo tour, let's get semi-postal. So how did this stamp come to be? Well, we can think more generally and ask, where does any stamp idea or design come from? I've mentioned this in a few videos previously, but this is the job of the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee. This is a group of 10 to 15 people who meet 4 times a year to wade through stamp subject ideas submitted by the public and to work with hired artists to develop designs. You can submit an idea yourself, just make sure you're following their guidelines. I've put a link in the video description. Of course, it's an advisory committee. They don't have final say, so who are they advising? Well, that would be the Postmaster General. He also gets to choose the members who are on the committee in the first place. And actually, the committee itself was created back in 1957 by the Postmaster General at the time, Arthur Summerfield, after some complaints about the choices that were being made for stamp subjects. Apparently, the centennial of poultry farming didn't make a splash among collectors. But why is the Postmaster General the one who gets to decide? Where does that power come from? Well, since the Postal Service reorganized back in 1971, the agency has been run by a board of governors, who are appointed by the president with the approval of the Senate. They're the ones who choose who the Postmaster General is and delegate to him the day-to-day decision-making. One interesting fact is that before the 1971 reorganization, the Postmaster General actually reported to the president directly instead of to a board of governors. And Franklin Roosevelt, famously a stamp collector himself, made suggestions and changes to stamp ideas directly. But we can go another step back. Who reorganized the Postal Service back in 1971? Well, that would be Congress. If we go back to grade school civics class, the legislative branch, Congress, is the one that writes laws, and they're the ones who design agencies like the post office. Those agencies end up located in the executive branch since they're the ones who actually carry out the laws. We can actually go one final step. Who says that Congress can create the post office in the first place? Well, that would be the Constitution. It's one of the explicit enumerated powers it gives to Congress. It also gives them the power to fight pirates on the high seas, so I feel like we're missing out on a really cool government job. So we basically have a chain of delegation going on here, all the way from Congress down to the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee. And that's actually how it works in a lot of agencies. Congress could be explicit on how things are run and try to micromanage things with the laws that they pass. Congress could have tried to design the Saturn V rocket themselves to get us to the moon and told NASA to build it, but they usually just define the broad goals and trust the people appointed and hired to fill in the blanks. In theory, Congress could decide what stamp subjects are chosen themselves, and that actually did sometimes happen. For a brief wave in the late 1940s, Congress got into a frenzy of passing laws for stamp subjects. In 1946, the Postal Service released 6 commemorative stamps, and in 1947, it was just 7. In 1948, though, they released 28 unique commemorative designs. In 1949, it was back down to 6 because people were complaining, and the Postmaster General asked them to stop. We do still see members of Congress introducing bills to recommend stamp subjects, but they're usually phrased as suggestions, and they're usually sent to committee and die a quiet death. This past session, members recommended, among other things, stamps for Buffalo soldiers, Lewis Howard Latimer, Ava Gardner, and Ralph Samuelson, the father of water skiing. Now, semi-postal stamps are different. Prior to the year 2000, they weren't even an option for the Postmaster General to do. Like I said in the introduction, these are stamps that cost more than the standard first-class letter rate, and the extra money goes towards charitable causes. There just wasn't authorization for the Postal Service to set something like that up. That meant the first one in the late 90s had to come from Congress. Now, Americans didn't invent the idea of the semi-postal stamp. In fact, they had been relatively common in some other countries, especially in Europe, for decades at that point. Here's a random set from World War II France for the National Relief Fund that was cheap on eBay. This is an American stamp channel. I don't have a collection. The spark for the idea came from Ernie Bodai, the chief of surgery at a hospital in Sacramento, California. His hope was to help fund breast cancer research through a semi-postal, and he lobbied his members of Congress to get on board. He was successful. Vic Fazio in the House and Dianne Feinstein in the Senate both introduced bills to create such a stamp. The first attempt died in 1996, but it was reintroduced in the next session in 1997, and that got some serious traction. Now, not everybody was on board with the idea. Some stamp collectors were against the idea of semi-postals in general, thinking of it almost as a tax on the hobby. Some folks at the Postal Service spoke out against the idea, in part because of a potential repeat of 1948, where members of Congress would start passing a wave of them for a variety of different good causes. That didn't really turn out to be correct, although we have seen plenty of bills to create semi-postal stamps introduced by members of Congress. Looking back at just the past 5 years, we've had proposed environmental stamps, like for Great Lakes restoration, stamping out invasive species, and preparing coastal communities for climate change. We've had health-related ones, like for stopping Lyme disease, preventing diabetes, and raising awareness for mental health. We've had pro-veteran stamps proposed, one against elder abuse, and one to help fund the Peace Corps. But returning back, that breast cancer stamp did ultimately pass, and overwhelmingly. An initial version was added to a spending bill in the Senate by an 83-17 vote, and the final version passed the House 422-3. The version that passed added 8 cents to the standard 32 cents that a stamp cost at the time, and the Postal Service was authorized to sell the stamp for 2 years. The stamp sold well, and continued to sell well as time went on. Today, the stamp has sold over 1 billion copies, raising nearly $100 million of additional revenue. Like I said, there was originally a cutoff date for selling the breast cancer stamp, but ultimately Congress extended that date multiple times. The first reauthorization also included other language, allowing the Postal Service to create new semi-postal stamps of their own choosing if they wanted, although they didn't end up exercising this power until 2017. As of this video, we've had 7 total semi-postal stamps, although the breast cancer stamp counts as 2 of them due to a reissue in 2014. In 2002, Congress authorized its second one, a semi-postal for families of 9/11 first responders. This one had a huge number of sales when they were first released, and then they quickly fell off until the program ended in late 2004, hitting 133 million sold total. The next semi-postal was to help stop domestic violence, but this didn't have the first wave of sales the 9/11 stamp did, and ended up selling 45 million copies. The most recent stamp created by Congress, and the only other one still available alongside the breast cancer stamp, is the Save Vanishing Species stamp from the intro. This first got released in 2011. As I mentioned before, the Postal Service has finally started using its power to release its own semi-postals, and as of this video, has released 2 of them, one in 2017 and one in 2019, and both are still available for purchase. The first was to help fight Alzheimer's disease. Apparently the Postal Service has printed 500 million of these, which was optimistic because they're currently reporting that they've sold about 10 million of them. The second and most recent is for healing post-traumatic stress disorder, of which they sold about 15 million of the 40 million printed. And those sales numbers might be a signal as to why we haven't seen more semi-postals. When the Alzheimer's stamp was released in 2017, the plan was actually to put a new one out every 2 years and to have each available only for those 2 years. They updated this policy in 2020, choosing not to do new ones so often and allowing for the ones already released to be on sale longer. This made all of those unsold Alzheimer's stamps available for purchase again. So take a look next time you're buying stamps. Semi-postals are a small way to help contribute to a good cause. Now, tigers might not be as cute as otters, but one of the charities that receives money specifically goes to help marine turtles. And look at those guys. They're pretty cute. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Something I didn't mention in the video is that semi-postals say first class on them, not forever. Technically, the value of the stamp is fixed at what you bought it at, and you need makeup stamps if postal rates changed. It's not clear how the Postal Service would know what price you bought a current semi-postal stamp at, though, so you should be safe.